I'm going to read for just, hi, welcome. I'm going to read for just a little while, and like literally maybe 12 minutes, 13 minutes, something like that. And I guess it's important to say that the part I'm going to read is very much the focused on the narrator. And the narrator's name is Molly, and for reasons we can talk about later, her name is Molly, and she's a dog, and she's not just a dog, but a dead dog. And we need to talk about why she's a dog and why she's a dead dog. And yeah, and I will say that I taught, as Rachel said, I taught queer and posthumanist lit at City University of New York, and I developed both of those programs there. And I basically wrote, this book is a kind of mixture of both of those two disciplines, and I wrote the novel that I always wish I could have taught. Basically, that's my this is birthed from 30 years of wanting to see something that I never saw in literature. So, all right, the chapter's called Grounding. As a final straw, they buried me in this traffic circle under cover of night. The soil was in the jaws of December, though I'd been in a freeze of another kind for months already. They were able to pull it off because the panhandlers and druggies that usually track by, they and the beat cops who tail them, beg off that time of year. And yet the relocation didn't go without a hitch. Just when they figured things were going smoothly, an officer from the Parks Authority picked up their scent and issued a citation for illegal dumping. Nothing about him said, "Don't do this." Instead, it was more, "I got a quota to fill." But never mind. They carried on, ticket in hand, Wren and Jake with Donald colluding. They hemmed me in one of the flower beds of this roundabout, just across from the beds, quelling the museum. That winter, I rattled with the semis passing by. I whiled away the time under that blinking eye overhead, the one that signals caution to the flow of cars, breaking from God knows where to God knows where. The vehicle shot past the place I wanted to be, in the company of the ever-musing one on the museum steps. That brazen nude, a thinker like me. It was there that Jake and I used to kill time when he should have been in school. The ground around me has softened now. The blanket with the chrysanthemum pattern that they wrapped me in has begun the process of decay. I sense the root of a daffodil breaking through, feeding off me. If Harry were here, he'd howl, "Stop your barking." But he isn't here. Not him, Florrie, or Diana, nor Jake for sure. It's just Wren and Donald who pay their respects. They and the little one do their best to stop by somewhere in the vicinity. Jake, meanwhile, is in another state, one a mile high, that paradise he up and hightailed it to. His exit from me was an expectation of some kind. An expectoration is more like it. Hacking up, ridding himself of his life here, or running for running's sake. Granted, a death is a tough nut to unshell, but the important thing is what comes after. Including basics like soil and water, it won't do to go looking for a better version elsewhere. I mean, demons follow you everywhere, to any soil or water, like the kind all around me. Unlike so much in life, they're uncancelable, like the memories that haunt me. I've heard April is the cruelest month, and it's true in a way. The rain drops down like tears, trapping fluorocarbons as they descend here in the forest city. But the sun shows through from time to time, making it a hybrid state that I inhabit. I'm attuned to the world it creates that's awash in blooms. In this year of the plague, the first of two in his time, and the one most people overlook, Jake considers himself lucky. Does he thank me now that he realizes finally that I had something to offer, about staying alive most of all? Not just him, but others too? They thought I was clueless, that I didn't see color, that I existed in a world of gray, as though that were a bad thing. I'd argue it's better than seeing things in black and white, or worse, seeing only color. Jake with a newfound vision, allowing him to notice me finally, which I sense all the way here. Those moments when he spirits himself into town, I recognize his shoes as he jogs by, though they avoid darkening the ground where I am. It's such a change from the way he and I were tethered for so many years. That is until he ran off and unleashed the others on me, as if he'd lost faith in his own kind, beginning with his own family. God forbid it should be just the two of us, a long-awaited meeting of souls, S-O-U-L-S, or souls, S-O-L-E-S, as the case may be. Usually he spills from Donald and Wren's, faking ignorance of my presence, as though that night in December never took place. I know not only his tread, but those of the others, though he assumes I'm oblivious. A mere swelling in the ground, a place marker for what was, a memory interred, anything but myself, a thinker like him. I make nothing of it. I inhabit a different reality, tucked away from the pain and inertia, the weight loss and lesions in Jake's world. Run, Jake! What is there to recall me by anyway? A daffodil, like any other. It too will droop. Toast it'll turn. It'll peter out in the sun. A ring of daffodils, a wheel of light, a circle of bulbs beneath the earth, and me among them. If Jake can't find me, it's because they never bothered to leave a stone. I heard him tell Wren that the one he found just above, black and shiny and pooched at one end, the rock he pocketed unbeknownst to anyone, reminded him of me. To which I replied, "Your heart, my dear." No, there was no stone or cross sticks planted during that makeshift ritual. God forbid. He would have never stood for that, for cross sticks most of all, which by then he'd renounced entirely. When the clouds don't bathe me, they bless me, stone or no stone, cross sticks or no cross sticks. Objective time abandons me. Now, a thing that doesn't exist up there, has assumed jurisdiction. Meanwhile, the grind of freezing and thawing dogs the soil. The rock below levitates upward, threatens to dislodge me, heaves into and irritates my side like a prod. The only relief I get is from words, from me, of all people, the one they refused to believe capable of both language and thought when I was up there. On this rock, I read tales almost too raw to relate, about personages faceless as sparrows, yet not without countenance. Consequence, too. The rock's untold tales and me, Molly, the two of us have taken up residence down here. We are too close for me to consider forgetting, just below the surface, the story stone in me in a drawn-out conversation. Its shoulders threatens to dislocate me permanently to the land of silence if I don't speak. No one sees or notices, but I recognize me. I spy this ancient erratic, product of a world I never knew, mottled as a kildeer's egg. It's neither jade nor diamond. It's more a bone to console me where they plop me down this rabbit hole. My only consolation is I know I haunt Jake still. For him my heart failed initially. I ranted about his rocky heart, stuck as I was in that electrophrase, tossed among the other stiffs, and from well over 1,000 miles away he heard. He came back. How could he possibly recognize me, I wondered at the time, with years and miles between us, not to mention a chain of events that held him after he reached the city of inversions, a mile high, stuffing a shoebox with cocktail napkins, drawn with phony names and numbers. I let it be known I was holding out for the whole enchilada, a proper visit and not a mere passing through, not to mention an apology for having abandoned me the way he did. But when I whiffed my boy's circumstances, up there, standing on a field of a different kind of passing than the one he fled here, that melted me, caused me to realign my position regarding him and our past. We've come to terms, Jake and I, in mortality, if you will. On the prairies and mesas, or whatever they're called, just below the foothills where he lives, where they season piety with 3 shakes of fanaticism. There are a bunch of crazies out here, he declared, much more religious than back east. All the way in the forest city, I feel the beat of the mariachis around him. I move with the pulse of the placita Tommy's from. I sense the beat across 1,400 odd miles, the way I never could back then. My gringo. What does he know about drum beats or heartbeats, or any kind of beat, quite frankly? Regarding Tommy most of all, the one he's got his eye on. The 2 of them check every food label they encounter, tot up vitamin and fat contents, he and Tommy both. The money he used to blow on the lottery he now sinks into running shoes. He listens to Spanish conjugations on his cassette player, mows his nails over verb tenses, hidden sugar contents, and unnatural dyes. When he's visiting Wren, he avoids the solitude of what nature there is here as he jogs by. Is that what the Mile High City has taught you? He buys ever more cushioned sneakers with thicker soles to separate himself from the earth. He moved to a trailer park, he told Donald on a power run, fronted by a fiberglass cowboy, giant, free, and eternal. Okay, that's the intro section, and now I'm going to jump. Is it Gary? Gary, I'm going to jump now to 237, and it's whoopsie. It's right. It's right after the break on 237. One thing the chagrin. Oh, so I should probably just say. So Molly, you can see, is a little put off that Jake skipped town on her, and she feels abandoned and so forth, and she's actually a bit ticked off. But she comes around, and she knows that Jake and Tommy are have possibilities, and so now she's pulling for them, as we can see in this paragraph here. One thing the chagrin taught me, Tommy, as cliche as it sounds, is nothing lasts forever. Neither cocksure belief, nor even an identity, given the way things shift. Being on the river taught me that. That there's no sense dreaming about a stable me when the flow of life alters it so much. I mean, a person's got to swim to keep up. Anything or anyone you point to as the finished thing is just yesterday's news. Like a body bobbing on a river, shy of the point it went in. There's a plenitude of Jakes out there, Molly's too. In all my life, I've never known Jake to be the way he is out here. And I'm sure you'll discover different ones as well, not just from year to year or decade to decade, but day to day. You'll have to make allowances. And when you see each other morphing into something unrecognizable, figure out a way to go with it. Truth be told, I sense myself shifting even as I relate the story. The tail wags the dog. That's T-A-L-E. The tail wags the dog, which is a koan to contemplate when you consider I'm history. The role I was relegated to was that of a soundboard, and here I am, sounding off. For these and other reasons, I feel you and all of us who've been slotted, subject to a name, limited to a singularity. I've heard people say it's inevitable, that kind of reduction, though I doubt it. Okay, and now we'll jump just to page, this last bit here, page 246, last paragraph, right after the break again. I'd like to say that a work read with good intentions lasts forever, though experience tells otherwise. Voices fail as people do. Any graveyard larger than this plot they planted me in gives witness to the hordes who've been silenced, never to speak again. Leaving what in their place? Marble, granite, sandstone, or wood, sometimes bare earth. I sense myself moving in that direction, feel my telltale wits giving in to the stone here, the one that continues to usurp my position, shouldering me from myself. It's nothing new to suggest, thinkers have been saying it for some time, namely that in spinning my tale for you, Tommy, I'm spinning my own death. The real kind, and not the demise of the body. shifting me into another kind of body, as though this web of words were my undoing. And yet, although everything I say mortifies me, sets me in a sense in stone, I live still. Which is to say that if you or Jake or anyone fancies exhuming me, simply take to digging, unearthing where my heart once was. Until you track down this rock here, the one I leave behind, a mass of lines. Just breathe into it and it'll spring to life. It'll be me and not me. Me as you fashion me most of all.
That's so gorgeous.
It's
Beautiful. It's such a beautiful, it's very poetic. Did you do that on purpose?
You know, I have my good friend in England, and I sent him a copy of the book, and next volume will have, next edition will have something in there, because he taught me to love poetry, and he taught me to love language, and he did it by introducing me to Wilfred Owen. Yeah, I mean, and we're talking many decades ago at this point, in the early 80s. And so, I don't know if I did it on purpose, but for me, that's what came out. And it is just, well, it's after teaching literature for all those years, but it's also, I wanted Molly to have a poetic voice. In the subsequent volumes, there's not such a poetry, because they're human voices mostly, and humans just generally don't speak poetically. But I wanted the canine narrator to have a kind of way of seeing the world that people don't normally have, and express it that way as well.
Because we had talked before about your interest in narrative approaches, and I think to have an animal, I mean, we think about Virginia Woolf and Flush, right?
That's right.
But what made you go with a puppy? What made you go with her name? What was the impetus for that as a narrative voice, as opposed to, you just were talking about it, but as opposed to a human voice?
Okay, so that's great. When I wrote this novel, I thought it was going to be the only novel I ever wrote, and I had to put everything I ever thought into it. And it's not quite that bad, but it's a little of that, because I remember reading Joyce's Ulysses a couple times in graduate school, and then teaching it many times. And Molly gets the last chapter of that thing, and I thought, damn it, she's got such a great voice. Why does she get the last chapter? I want to give my Molly, she's named after that Molly.
Oh, that's
I
fantastic.
want my Molly to be a badass, and I want her to have the whole damn book. And so that was one inspiration. Another inspiration was I wanted to think a lot in writing about the function of narrators. Lots of people talk about stories and how important stories are for their traditions, for their history, and so forth, but I wanted to think about the storyteller, and that comes out of having taught Homer for almost 40 years, really. I put on there it was 30 years, but I've been teaching, I taught Homer for 40 years, from the time I first began to when I ended. And Joyce, and I mean, where do we even begin with the fascinating storytellers?
Mm-hmm.
And so, just to think about the narrative voice, who is that person in Homer? And I wanted to think about storytellers. And for me, when I started thinking, well, let's think about storytellers. What are they, and what are narrators really? And it dawned on me that they're distillations of so many voices in a culture. They're representing literally a culture at a particular moment in history. And so I wanted, and so I thought, well, that's a mutt, right? Like, that is a mutt. Because when the first versions of this novel were a human being narrating the story. I started it in 1992, I think.
I was going to ask you how long this took, actually.
Yeah, I started in 92, and I remember there was a poet that I was working with. We would trade our manuscripts, and she, when I gave her the short story that I wrote of this guy who was in the grave and speaking from the grave, she said, "This is such a unique voice. This is so new for you. I sense this is the beginning of a novel." And so that was 92. Then life went on. I was a teacher. You never have a single second when you're a teacher. So it wasn't until 2007 that I returned to writing it. And by that point I had been teaching posthumanism for a long time. And so I thought, well, of course, all narrators are mutts. And then it dawned on me that a book really, like, just think about it. A book is a kind of grave, because it's just dead matter. It's lifeless. You could chop it with an axe. You could set it on fire with a match. You could, I don't know, beam it up, Scotty. You could do a million things with a book. It's just pure matter. But yet when you open it, the characters all spring to life, right? They're all zombies in a way, and they only come to life because of the interest of readers. And this is why Molly says, just, go to this stone and breathe life into it. This is the stone, right? This thing covered with lines. And so, so it had to be a mutt, and it had to be a dead mutt, just in order, because I was trying to capture those ideas.
That's so interesting too, that you cited Homer and then you went to Joyce, and you mentioned too that you hadn't been able to find the novel that you wanted to teach.
That's right.
What have you found? I mean, because there's been so much amazing publishing in the LGBTQ plus community over the last 2 generations, at least more.
More, yeah.
Were there any contemporary writers that got close?
Good question. Here's my complaint. I've said this twice already in talks. My complaint is that most gay male fiction is about white people and coastal lifestyles and bougie lifestyles. And that never sat with me. So I also wanted to write a novel that is really about diversity and embracing diversity, and to accept the reality in a queer novel that this is not a white world. And my life, I don't live in a white world. When I taught, I was oftentimes the only white person in the room, and I wanted to reflect all of America in the diversity of the characters in this novel. But I also, I wanted to write, since I grew up in the Rust Belt. I grew up in Cleveland. I am a Midwesterner through and through, And,
yeah, I do.
I'm a Midwesterner through and through. My dad died in the factory that he worked in, and I never, in all those years trying to put a queer lit course together, found a single book about the point of which was diversity, the point of which was intersectionality, the point of which was working class life. And also I did not want to write a book that was only a queer novel, or could only be reduced to this thing that we call a queer novel. I wanted it to be a novel that dealt with the human condition, and of which queerness is just one version of the human condition. So yeah, that was a lot to think about, yeah.
Can you say a little bit more then about the intersectionality of the novel in terms of location, in terms of the characters that you present? Because you mentioned Donald, you mentioned Ren, you mentioned Jake, but for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
But for the folks who haven't read the novel yet, to give them a sense of how you feel that you accomplished that. Not to mention too, locations and also the era.
Oh, the era is important to me because I'm, like many people, mortified by Trump America. And I grew up in Trump America before it had the name. Like, I grew up in MAGA America. It was white flight America. And when I was young, I was telling you the other day, I used to go downtown to the Cooper School of Art. When I was 14, I don't know how my parents ever allowed me to, but I went downtown to take these life drawing classes on Saturdays. And I realized, oh my God, there's this amazing world out there where it's a total world of diversity. And I would go back to my white flight suburb and think, I gotta get out of here. This is really scary. And so the minute, I was not even 18, I was in my, 17 years old when I got out, because I just understood this is really not America. And so and so the characters in the novel, okay, a couple things, intersectionality. When I taught, I used to say, complain to my students. I mean, imagine a teacher complaining to their students that, why does gender matter so much in novels? Why does sexuality matter so much? Why does race matter? Why does ethnicity matter? And I wanted to, and I would say that to my students, and they would say, baby steps, professor, baby steps. We're going to get there, but baby steps. And so I thought, I'm going to write a novel in which people are not wearing a badge about their identity, but it is going to be very intersectional in that it'll be a feminist novel. It is going to be a race conscious and a race, what should we say, a race affirmative novel. It's going to be a broad, it's going to be broad confessionally, so not just about white Christianity in America, although that takes a big hit in the novel, there's no doubt about it. It's going to be about animality, because for me, animals are people too. So that's the intersectional part, is I wanted to write a book that you could teach in sort of all of the ghetto areas of academia, which I think of queer studies as a kind of ghetto, right? There's ghettos all over the place in academia. And I wanted to write something that could be taught literally in any one of those places. And I'm sorry for using that word. It's probably the wrong word to use. But we used to use that word. My students use it all the time. So, yeah.
It's also about the era that it's
the era,
set in.
Yeah, the era. So, gosh, how to even talk about that? Well, being a young queer person growing up in a kind of a MAGA world, it was a frightful, scary existence of a lot of bullying, and I see what's happening now, and I see what's happening in Florida and in Texas, and we could just name a whole bunch of places, couldn't we?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I wanted to give hope for people who are living in a MAGA world, or like the white flight suburb that I grew up in, which was just think of any ism you can, and it applies to that world. I wanted to give hope and show a way out, or show that you can survive out of it. And the way to survive out of it is by mutual responsibility, embracing difference, embracing diversity, care, like just basic care for other human beings. But for me, again, it's not just humans. It's about the natural world. And just to talk about Molly again, coming from my post-humanist class,
Do you want to define that just real quickly? What is post-humanism?
Okay, so this will be, I'll do like a minute, discussion about post-humanism. So humanism was the thing invented by Plato. Man is the measure of all things. And man is the measure of all things is a very scary thing, because it means that all of nature is less than. All of nature, it lives in a lack. All of nature is exploitable. And I mean, what we're doing to not just animals, but the whole world through, because of industrial farming and because of industrialism in general, that's okay, because humanism says we're the ones, right? And part of humanism too, man is a measure of all things. That means women live in a state of lack. That means people of color live in a state of lack, because it ended up being a very white European thing. And so post-humanism is a rejection of everything that Plato was talking about in saying that man is the measure of all things. And so Molly, as a kind of representation not just of a post-humanist perspective about the world, but the whole idea of the tether, the lead, is also a play on words of the British notion of the lead, L-E-A-D, right? A leash, the leash to our undoing. It's Molly is sort of an allegorical figure of the entirety of nature, and the Doi family that she belongs to, that really has its head up its behind, is sort of like, I hate to sound misanthropic, but it's it's humans, right? And what we have done to the world. And so, I mean, all of nature is tethered to the interests of human beings, basically. And look how great a job we're doing. And for years I taught Elizabeth Colbert's The Sixth Extinction. And in that course, every single semester, there would be a moment in reading Elizabeth Colbert when a student would say, "Oh my God, Professor, we are the problem. We're the problem in the world. Like, it's us." And I sort of wanted Molly to represent that voice. And oftentimes she says, "Nature and I are one."
Yes.
Yeah, and it's sort of, again, that's the allegorical aspect of it.
Even that little stone that's nudged into her back, and
That's
she
right.
too will become eventually, with the striations that you describe, what her body will eventually look like. She's natural,
That's right.
and her hope is, of course, that Jake, her former owner,
Yeah.
will catch on.
And that's another reason why she has to be a dead dog, because look what we're doing. I mean, how many species have we put into extinction as a result of our activities in the world? So all those things are part of it. But I want to still go back to the 70s when it takes place. It is, oh yeah, I guess I mostly said that I wanted to present a MAGA world before MAGA and show that there is a way out of it. I actually wanted this to be a very hopeful novel and a sort of an optimistic novel for people.
And how does it reflect then your own experience? Because many of us were 70s children. It was a fabulous time.
It was.
But it was also, I think, for our generation, a first time when you could actually see an opening or create an opening. I mean, that really starts with the beats and all of that sort of thing. But if I'm talking about that sort of alternative community, 60s and 70s, and you were right in the heart of that.
I was.
And how do you feel that well, and you succeeded, you escaped.
Yeah, I did escape. This is the point.
Yes.
This is the point. I escaped. And you know, it was a time of liberation, but on the other hand, we said the word liberation a lot, do your own thing. I'm not sure we were really very good at actually doing it. And I mean, we were better in a way than our parents, but my sister and I were talking about this. My sister was the conversant in the reading in Cleveland, and we were talking about this, and we said, here's what really did it. We were in the therapy generation. And, you know, our parents were not in the therapy generation, and as a result of that, we worked through a lot of stuff that was never worked through before, I think. And that's another way, that sort of by talking, right? We worked a lot out.
There was a space for it for the first time.
There was.
I mean, if you think, for example, as you were speaking about the therapy generation, I was just thinking about cinema and thinking about how amazing it was when Hitchcock in the 40s was using psychoanalytic tropes and bringing that to the mainstream. And so then once you get post-war, and then here we are, the cherished babies.
The cherished babies.
Of that post-war generation. That was the first time that there was public space for it.
Yeah, but let's just say the cherished generation that voted in the majority for Trump.
Supposed to be optimistic.
Yeah, but my point is, we failed in a lot of ways. I think my students would really talk a lot about the OK Boomer
Yes.
movement, and I would say, oh, I feel for you. I feel for you because I get it. You know, I think we thought we were doing more than we really did, and we're all trying still. We're trying to get there, but I think the point about the novel, and especially the point about the entire trilogy, will be this is a generation that tried. They had some successes and they had a lot of failures, and but there was an effort there to get out of. And again, this is why I think the post-humanist, post-modernist, post-structuralist, whatever movement you want to talk about, why it was so liberating is because it's the first one. When you think about Derrida in Of Grammatology, which is my second favorite book in the world, what he's trying to do is put the final nail in the coffin of humanism in there. And from Homer to Heidegger, which is, how many years is that? That's about 2,500 years. From Plato to Heidegger, 2,500 years, we were under the spell, or under the, shall we say, the yoke of humanism. And Nietzsche tried to get us out of it, but we're still stuck. So I think it has its best chance of being overturned more now than ever in history. And I think that humanism got us to this point. There's another book you can read by Timothy Morton called Humankind. It's capital H and capital K for kind, all one word, in which he goes back further. He says it's from the minute agriculture was invented 12,000 years ago is when humanism really began, and we started to sort of work to destroy the planet, you know. Yeah, sorry.
So is humanism the lead to our undoing?
Well, the undoing is definitely, undoing of a million things, actually. It's, in the terms of the novel, it's the undoing between Jake and Molly. It's also what happens in the family because of interracial marriage in the family and then having a queer child. It's about the undoing that humans have caused with industrialization and industrial farming and all that stuff. It is about in a more recent history, it's about whatever it is that Trump America was about, another kind of undoing, from my perspective at least, that kind of undoing as well. So there's about a million things that's happening, but it's a kind of good undoing too, in the sense that just in the generational sense that you were talking about, that new ideas came along in a super powerful way in the 60s and 70s.
They did, and maybe they had been there before, but they hadn't been in the public domain like that before.
That's right.
And to make excuses for our generation, nobody had ever done that before.
Nobody had ever done.
So you're stumbling along and you don't know how to do it, but you're reading about it and you're hearing about it and it looks like a really cool thing.
Yeah.
So you're going to give it a try, but without that experience. And that leads me to this question too, is that why you made this into a coming of age novel? It's a Bildungsroman, and
It is.
does that, is that inspired by your sense of hopefulness?
It is, actually, and a little bit of Dickens.
That little Dick, how about that? Why? Where does Dickens come in?
Well, I'm thinking of Pip in Great Expectations,
Mhm.
where he goes from poverty to the status of gentleman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what would you do? What do you want in a capitalistic society but to go from poverty to, I don't know about a gentleman anymore, but certainly not poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think it's a Bildungsroman, not just economically, ideationally, insightfully. A Bildungsroman, not just about a certain character, but also a culture,
Mm-hmm.
from whatever it was that Virginia Woolf is railing against in Mrs. Dalloway, that old school, stodgy, 1 mile square
Sure.
center of London, you know, and that very thing that the daughter Elizabeth and the Doris Kilman are against. I sort of wanted to piggyback on their voices and give them, in the second novel, they're told two whole characters, Doris and Elizabeth, yeah, Lizzie in the second novel.
How did it evolve into 3 novels? Was that a conscious choice or was it organic? I mean, did it unfold that way, or was it a conscious decision that you made in terms of your writing process and your structure?
Well, one of my complaints about fiction writers is that they write too long. And I did not want to write a 1,200-page novel. I wanted to write a short, little, consumable, 268-page novel. And I thought I can't write all that in one. And so I decided I'm going to do it in 3 parts.
Okay.
And they're all going to be like this.
That's interesting because it's in 3 parts, which is kind of Victorian.
Is that right?
Well, if you think about it in a way, when the Victorian novelists were publishing, they were usually doing it in 3 volumes, right? Except for George Eliot with Middlemarch, who did 4.
Oh, yeah,
right?
That's right.
So in a way, there's a lovely recognition, I think, through that structure of influence, and at the same time rethinking
Yeah.
that structure.
Plus, I wanted. So each of the three, I'm working on the third now. The second one is all done. Each of the three has a different tone, a different era, a different feel, a different. The main characters will follow through all three, but they will be joined by a whole new cast of characters that speak to completely different themes than are going on here. So it evolves, and the point that's also part of that Bildungsroman is this thing itself will evolve. You know,
Mhm.
yeah.
And you mentioned too, because so this starts in the 60s, or in the 70s rather. You also mentioned the plague.
Uh-huh.
So is that something that you're going to be addressing in the second novel or the third, or is it background? It's not the focus, but is it the background?
In the second novel, it's the focus.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's going to be the plague. You know, we're talking about AIDS, which is the kind of, from my perspective, a plague that was radically overlooked. We lived through it, and everyone sort of, I guess I was persona non grata by virtue of being queer, and so was every queer person during that time. I mean, they were afraid to kiss us, they were afraid to touch us, they were afraid to be around us, to breathe the same air. But I think that it's, my dissertation was about monsters, and it's called Monsters and Menaces, and I think it's about also what the status of being different is, and how the society does not know how to handle difference, and of every kind. And I want the plague to be a metaphor for our inability, well, again, the failure of care and love and responsibility, but also our inability to deal with different bodies than the ones we've been seeing all these years. And in the third novel, the second plague it takes place during that time, and it's mentioned during that time, but that's not the focus in a direct way. Something much different is, and I won't say what that is, but it's, I'm still working it out. But yeah, they're all different. Every single one is different.
Do you have a release date for the second novel?
I don't. I just sent it off, so we're going to see where it goes. Fingers crossed. Yeah, thank you very much. And but hopefully next year. I'm hoping next fall.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I ask you how you and Saddle River Press came together?
Yeah. I mean, they're the angels in my life, because I probably sent this novel out to 250 agents and presses, and then one day someone said, "Oh my God, like, stop sending to the big five, just send to independent presses." And so finally I sent it out to 30 presses. They're the first ones that responded, and I said, "Damn, I'm taking it." That's how that worked. I did my research, I looked at all their works, I actually read works by their authors. I thought, this is a really smart press. They're both former professors, the owners of the press are former professors. They are so amazing. I just, Ruth Thompson and Don Mitchell are the owners of that press. They are just amazing human beings, and there's nothing like getting the letter that says, "I'm so pleased to inform you that," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't just that they said, "Yeah, we'll publish it." They said, "We love it," and you gotta love a press that loves your book, you know.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You absolutely do. What would you say is the, other than getting it published
Yes,
by a press, which is always thrilling,
it's thrilling.
what are you proudest of in terms of the book? And other than doing it, okay, I
Other
mean,
than
that's
doing it,
huge,
yeah.
of course, but other than that, what do you feel is the greatest, I don't know, maybe the most important theme, or the thing that you would want people to walk away from it with?
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for that question, because I love it. The thing I'm most proud of is Molly, and Molly's voice, and how she morphed over the years, and what she stands for allegorically, and that I was able to pack so much. I'm sorry to say, it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, is that it? I sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm proud of Molly's depth and her dimension. And you know, I started writing. First time I ever wrote was in 1978 when I was living in Idaho Springs that you talked about before. I lived in a trailer, smaller than this space right here, and I started to write, and I realized, because I always wanted to write, and I realized, damn, I don't know crap about life. How can I write anything? So I told myself I needed to live more, and I needed to go to school to develop the crafts. And so I did that, and that took like 4 decades, but I did it. And when I think of where I started and where I ended up with, I have to say I'm pleased with Molly. I mean, I really love Molly.
And do you feel also that then that background of your own, how did that inform your teaching?
You mean my working class background?
Working class background, and also, yeah, that sense of, I know I want to do this, and I maybe don't have that background, and then 40 years of teaching a variety of different students. How did your experience then inform how you approached students, maybe in terms of their writing or the intersectionality in a classroom?
Wonderful. Okay, so I hope this isn't a long way, but I will say that when I was young, my dad and I used to watch every day when he got home from the factory the show called Jim Doney's Adventure Road. And Jim Doney's Adventure Road was this guy, like typical Middle East, Eastern European, going all around the world. And from the time I was in 3rd grade watching Jim Doney's Adventure Road, I had this vision of this big, broad, diverse world. And then I started reading. I think not until I was in 5th grade, because we talked about this. We all hated kids' books when we were growing up. So I didn't really read until I got to 5th grade, and I read Jules Verne. I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Mysterious Island, a whole bunch of whatever YA novels. I guess are those YA, or are they kids novels? Whatever they are, I read them.
Cool kids.
Cool kids, that's right. I read those, and I began to realize there was this world, and then of course I was going downtown, right, and drawing nudes on Saturdays, and when I was 14. And so here I was, a working class kid who worked in a factory myself, not the same factory, but a factory that was in the same group as my dad's factory. I was working in the factory one day, and I said, 2 things are going to happen. I'm going to commit suicide, or I'm going to get out. And I'm not just going to get out of the town where I grew up, out of the factory or the town I grew up, but I'm getting out of this state and I'm seeing the world. And so I did all that. I've been around the world many times by now. I so love. I drove with my travel friend 4,000 miles through Africa, which was just an amazing experience. Through the subcontinent, all around the world. I've been China, you name it. And so part of that travel was inspired by my students who were from all over the world. And I oftentimes visited the very towns they told me they were from, just to see where they were from.
That's wonderful.
If they told me a restaurant to go to in Delhi, I went to a restaurant in Delhi. If they told me wherever they said, go here, professor, I went there. And they were almost all working class like me. And they, like me, we couldn't even drive our car many times. We didn't have money for gas. So we had to walk to church on Sunday, and I walked to school, and we did all that because we were just dirt poor. And my students were in my same economic class. And I was a tough professor because I know that I had teachers who sat on me because they saw potential in me, and they were tough. They were really tough on me in particular, and I was tough on them, but I got so many of them, or I helped so many of them get into PhD programs and master's programs, and you name it, I did it. So I just, as we've said, right, we never loved the bureaucratic BS, but damn did we love our students.
Yes.
And damn did they inspire us, and damn did they become our teachers, and damn did they become family. I'm still in touch with my students. So yeah, all that, and this is my love letter to them, by the way. This novel is my love letter to every student I've ever had in my lifetime.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
gorgeous. On that note, why don't we open it up? Does anybody have any questions?
Anybody? Huh?
Nothing.
Do you have any questions?
Well, I have to say that when I read your book, you're setting it in the 70s, but for some reason in my head, I heard a soundtrack of the 60s when I was reading.
Yeah, the '60s is in there too. Yeah, that's right. It's in the cusp between the '60s and '70s, right there. Because it's talking about Woodstock, and it's talking about a lot of, in Cleveland there was a great swamp eerie Dada Boom. That was the local hippie newspaper, and that was in the late '60s, right? Yeah. So a lot of the references are late '60s, but the actual bulk of the thing takes place in the '70s. Yeah. The present in the novel is the '70s, and the '60s are all flashbacks. Yeah. Yeah. Here.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of making the transition from being an academic type writer, writing scholarly work and such, to doing fiction and writing novels? What that kind of process is like, or transition, or journey that you went to get to your writing now?
I had to cut one head off and grow another one because the academic head for a fiction writer is poison. And I published many academic novels, academic articles, and you have a certain brain for that, right? And wow, I think one of the reasons it took 16 years is because I had to talk about Bildungsroman. I had to go from that academic brain to a brain that was mindful of all that stuff, and was especially mindful of the literary tradition, which I love so passionately. From Gilgamesh till whatever just was published yesterday or today. I love the tradition so passionately, and but I had to change the way I thought before the words could come out differently. And before the poetry was possible, I had to let go of the academic. I won't say what I would normally say. Because I learned it really well.
Yes.
I mean, at NYU, you were trained in academies and jargon, and I knew I wanted to let go of all that. And I'm so glad I did. I feel like I'm a better person now. And one of the first readers I gave it to, this was, oh my God, so long ago, she said, you need to leave your academic brain behind. And she said, I want to read it again, but not until you've done that. And so like 3 years later, I worked at it, and I gave it to her again. And she said, oh my God, you did it. Which is still there. I mean, you can still see it rearing its head in places, but in general, I think I did it. But it really was a lopping. Yeah. Do you know that process of getting rid of one brain? And
A little bit, yeah.
do you write? Do you write?
Do I write?
Do you write?
write?
Do you write fiction?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
And are you an academic?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
so you know.
Yeah.
Do you find it hard?
It's very hard.
Yeah.
Just because of the conventions of academic writing are kind of very strict, and
They are.
there's certain expectations. And, yeah, and I also came from a legal background. where
Oh,
there's
even
a
better.
Total, another set of expectations about writing and communication. And so, yeah, I think if you're in any sort of field that's pretty stringent in its rules, to move into creative writing is a challenge.
I think you're totally right. And but I do love the process of letting go of it. And I have to really be honest and say, after the trilogy's done, I'm thinking of writing an academic book about animality and about posthumanism, because I think about it so much, and I realize my blog is me sort of baby steps towards writing an academic book about animality, and so I sort of want to be able to switch. Is that called code switching? I want to be able to code switch. So jump from one to like literally like remove and like put the other one back on. and go back and forth like that. Because I have a lot I want to say, and I think it won't, what I want to say about animality, I'm saying it here, but can only really be said in an academic setting, since I want to sort of expand on Derrida's The Animal That Therefore I Am. What's your field, by the way?
I work in a college of education.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's
So,
great.
yeah.
Where are you? Which
That's the
school?
University of Minnesota.
Oh, at the U, okay.
Wonderful. That's so cool. So, any other?
Did you have your hand up?
Well, I had a little question. You've used a word twice that I don't know, and it starts with a B.
Oh.
You just used it again, like Bundundum.
Huh?
It's, it's that kind of,
Oh,
Bildungsroman.
yeah, what is that? Now, say it again.
Sorry, Bildungsroman.
I don't know what that is.
Go ahead.
Bildung is a German word for formation or education.
Oh, okay.
And a roman is a novel.
Novel.
So a novel of formation or education in which someone starts without education and also class, because obviously in the Victorian era they thought class and education went together. And so Dickens is, Great Expectations is probably the quintessential Bildungsroman, where you have Pip, who ends up as a pauper and starts as a pauper and ends up as a gentleman. And he gets an education along the way.
And if I may, your dissertation was on the Gothic. That's an area that I work in. And the Gothic also provided a very helpful framework in the 1750s and 60s
Yeah.
for the Bildungsroman, because it allowed for that. Actually, it's the Romantics who are that wave of youth and energy and challenging. But where do you put it? Well, you put it in a scary old house.
That's right.
And your novel, clearly being narrated by a dead dog,
Yeah,
begins with, it has that Gothic framework,
it does.
which is in a way, I mean, the 70s, if you want to think about it, 60s and 70s were quite a Gothic framework for a lot of experience. So,
They were.
weren't they just?
Just add a tab.
We'll talk about that later.
Also, when you think about the novel is a product of the 18th century, the rise of the middle class,
Mhm.
right? So the whole point of the novel was to proliferate a kind of literature that was for people of leisure, of newfound leisure. They're no longer servants. They're bourgeois class. They needed something to read.
That's right,
Yeah.
literacy, for the
Literacy.
first time.
That's right.
Happens. So you can look at the Industrial Revolution, you can look at all that, and the whole world shifts then.
That's right.
But I was thinking as you were talking, I do think young academics are putting two fingers up to that separation of church and state that happened certainly
Yeah.
when we were in graduate school, where, oh my God, humor in an academic article,
I know.
wit,
That's
please.
right.
And I really think that's changed.
It is changed.
And it's changing all the more.
Also mentioning I in an academic
God
novel.
or an academic paper at all. God
Yes,
forbid.
exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to say too, I did my my dissertation on the Gothic novel, and I said that before. Never mind. But yeah, so it's sort of, again, it's part of my background. Yeah. So I'm thinking in those terms. And when Molly's talking about the soil and water around her, I mean, I can't help but think of The Castle of Otranto by Anne
Oh
Radcliffe.
God,
When
wonderful.
she wakes up, the heroine wakes up in a charnel house, with worms all around her and dead bodies like jellying out all around her. Yeah, exactly. So all that right there.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And Poe.
And Poe,
And a
for
little
sure.
touch of Poe in the nighttime.
And don't forget Hawthorne, by the way. There's a little Hawthorne in here too.
Is there anything else before we close? I hope you don't mind, I'm wrapping it up.
What's your name, by the way?
Jinder.
Jinder, thank you so much for coming. Do you have any question?
This has been a complete surprise to me. I was just sitting and reading another book and I heard clapping and I was like, okay. I guess
Oh, thank you
So,
so
That's
much.
wonderful.
so it's all new. I'm looking forward to looking up the book and you.
Oh,
later.
thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thanks for staying, because, a lot of times I walk out. They listen 5 minutes and bye-bye. So thank you so much for staying. I'm really touched.
Would you like to let them know you've got a website?
I do have a website, donaldmengay.com. Feel free to go and check out my blog there. Also, you don't need to go and see a video because you came here. I have videos of previous readings on there and discussions.
Any closing comments for us?
Um,
Words of wisdom?
oh gosh, no, words
Darn
of
it.
wisdom. What is it? Is it, pork bellies, is that it? No, from me of all people, no. What's the one from, The Graduate? Pork bellies.
Use pork bellies.
Plastics.
Plastics.
Yeah, plastics, don't forget plastics.
Well, let's give Don a round of applause. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, thanks for coming and staying, thank you.